Good morning and half a day. Welcome to our virtual town hall with the Guam Chamber of Commerce and the Women's Chamber of Commerce. My name is Catherine Castro, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's session entitled Guidelines for Reopening Your Business. There's some housekeeping rules before we get started. All our participants are on mute today. You had an opportunity before the webinar to send questions to Rebecca from the Chamber. If new questions come up, please feel free to send them via the question feature, which is located at the right corner of your screen. And the Chamber team will pass the messages to our panelists during the Q&A portion of the program. So joining us today, after the main presentation, are members of the Guam Recovery Panel of Advisors, to include Joaquin Cook, President and CEO of Bank of Guam, David John, President, ASC Trust LLC, Christine Balletto, Chairwoman of the Board, Guam Chamber of Commerce, and Holly Rustic, President of the Guam Women's Chamber of Commerce. Our main presenter is Dr. Artemio Ricky Hernandez, and he is the current Deputy Administrator for the Guam Economic Development Authority, and recently was appointed lead for the Governor's Recovery Panel of Advisors. He is also an adjunct instructor of Accounting and Public Administration at the University of Guam, the Investments Committee Vice Chairman of the Government of Guam Retirement Fund Board of Trustees, and a board member of the Research Corporation for the University of Guam. Prior to serving at GIDA, he is the longest serving director of the Guam Legislature Office of Finance and Budget. I'm sure we're all ready to get started, so please help me welcome Ricky Hernandez. Welcome, Ricky.
Hi, Kathy. Thank you so much, and I really thank you for the opportunity. Thanks for housing me here at the Chamber. Had some bad internet connection at home, so came down to present to everyone here today.
Thank you. I'm going to sign up now.
Sure, thank you. So I just want to first say that I thank you for the opportunity to present to everyone, the Guam Chamber of Commerce and the Guam Women's Chamber of Commerce for this opportunity. I know that Kathy had mentioned that I'm the lead for the Governor's Recovery Panel of Advisors. I'd say just maybe the lead coordinator, coordinating between the medical professionals and experts, as well as the business experts, and trying to blend those interests. Obviously, could be conflicting interests, but we came together to form a common interest in terms of how we have been able to roll out this recovery plan for at least the framework for a vision and an end goal toward recovery. And so this presentation is I'm hoping to be brief, but pretty specific in terms of what the government has done through our recovery panel of advisors, and with what the governor has with Governor Leon Guerrero has approved to happen over the next few days. And so these are just guidelines for reopening your business. And what I wanted to kind of go over first is the fact that just basically go over a general overview of what was presented on Thursday last week at a press conference with the governor. And this was the Jalan para Hinemlo plan, the Road to Recovery, or the Journey to Recovery plan. And there were three main questions that we tried to answer as it relates to this Road to Recovery. The first question, when, I'm not going to spend too much time today on, because I can just say clearly that based on some of the data, the medical data coming in terms of cases, it appears that we are on track to meet some of the triggers or the criteria that will help inform the decision of the governor to move into the next phase of reopening the economy. What we'll be focusing on today more of is on the what and the how. And so the what businesses, what government agencies and services, and what individual activities will be authorized, and the how, what are the responsibilities of businesses and government and individuals during each phase of this reopening. So in terms of what we're going to be going over today, we'll be focusing on just these next two questions. I would say that there might be another question of why, why these businesses, why not this and why not that, and those, obviously those types of things, hopefully we can try to address, but I'm going to try and focus on the what and the how. And so, next slide. So the next slide here, I'm just going to kind of briefly go over what these pandemic condition of readiness levels really mean. And as we all might be aware, during typhoon emergencies or other physical emergencies, but mainly typhoon, that there's condition of readiness levels. And so what we did as recovery panel advisors was we wanted to use something very familiar to people. And so we used the condition of readiness name or moniker or acronym, but we added pandemic, obviously, to kind of just formalize an understanding of the phases of this recovery plan. And what we're currently in is what we call Pandemic Condition of Readiness 1, which is PCOR 1, which includes maximum restrictions. And these restrictions are obviously all we're experiencing right now. What we're going to be focusing on a lot today is PCOR 2, which includes moderate restrictions. And these are gradual lifting of restrictions. And we'll talk about what those types of restrictions are. PCOR 3 and 4 obviously are for probably a later time. But as you go down the further down this pandemic condition of readiness level system, it gets a little bit more flexible in terms of how, because there are so many unknowns with this unprecedented pandemic, and as we get down the line further, obviously there's going to be changes to this, and I did reiterate last week when this was presented that this isn't a perfect plan, and that obviously as new information emerges, what will be open or what can be open during any of these phases or any of these PCOR levels will change. Okay. So I said I'm not going to spend too much time on when, but just as a precursor to answering the other questions, the when has been established to be, or expected to be, May 11th, which is Monday, to have a pandemic condition of readiness 2 level be declared, and we'll talk about what that means later on in the slide presentation. But the when is we're hoping to expect, depending on how medical data and public health preparedness capabilities are come to pass, basically over the next couple of days. The governor may be announcing the executive order that will trigger that. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. So I didn't want to spend too much time on when, but what we're going to talk about is really what and how. So what businesses, what NGOs, or what government and individual activities are authorized. So this slide, obviously, I think many people have already seen. I have a caveat here that obviously Department of Public Health and Social Services is going to be issuing out a guidance memo, very similar to guidance memo 2020-05, which identified a lot of the very specific details as to what essential businesses are, what essential activities are, and so forth. So that guidance is being prepped today. I believe it might be issued out sometime today. But what we're going to talk about here is what are authorized activities that can reopen on a limited basis during PCOR 2, and heavy emphasis on limited basis. But on the left side of the screen, this has been slightly updated from what was presented on Thursday, because this is what is expected to be in the Department of Public Health and Social Services guidance memo. And so the business and NGO activities to be authorized upon PCOR 2 declaration, this is upon May 11th, once that decision is made, is all essential businesses operating in PCOR 1. Okay, so that has to be made clear that those that are operating currently, legally currently, are authorized in PCOR 2. So everything carries forward for that. The ones that you'll see below are what will be in addition to upon declaration of PCOR 2. These are retail stores, real estate and automotive sales, salons, as you can see here, florists, shopping centers, and malls. Through discussion with the physician's advisory group, elective medical and dental procedures, treatments, and therapies, and then other professional services not already considered an essential business in operating in PCOR 1. So these are expected to be included under the guidance memo that will be released sometime, hopefully in the next I'd say 6 hours or so. We're just waiting for public health to approve those. Just to make this very clear, PCOR 2, just because the businesses on the right side aren't listed on the left side, does not mean they may not or will not open, or there's no possibility of opening during PCOR 2. I know I didn't talk about a lot of the triggers as it relates to the different PCOR levels, but PCOR, to get to PCOR 2, there was supposed to be at least one trigger related to 14 days, consecutive days of downward trajectory as it relates to positive cases, and as well as it relates to positive cases as a percent of total cases. And so we're hitting those trajectories currently. And so during PCOR 2, the expectation for that is that over a 28-day period, that has to happen, or that is expected to be a trigger. And so just because PCOR 2 may be as long as 28 days, that doesn't necessarily preclude the ability for the governor to begin to lift additional restrictions on certain business activities, such as the ones you see on the right side, and maybe many other ones that will come up as we kind of operate in this PCOR 2 environment. So I just wanted to make that very clear, that the ones that have been the ones on the left side, the business activities on the left side, are the ones that are most likely and probably going to be included in the public health guidance memo that's going to be released. And the ones on the right side and any other ones that may not be listed, that are not considered essential businesses, those will be on a case-by-case basis, will be determined to be opened, as necessary, and as obviously comfort level with the governor, and in terms of medical data and how cases and hospitalization arise over the next week or so. Those decisions will be made at that time. Caveat on the bottom here is that, and we'll talk about it in the next few slides, obviously limited basis is a very integral piece of this gradual reopening process. And so we'll be talking about in the next few slides about the how. So how will these businesses, or how should the businesses operate, obviously with social distancing and things like that. We'll talk about some of those details in the next few slides. I just want to kind of throw this in here about government services. The focus of the recovery panel of advisors, as well as the government, as well as the governor and lieutenant governor, was to gradually reopen government customer-focused services, and really those that are related to commerce. So you'll notice here that all government services operating in PCOR 1 will continue to operate. And I won't list out everything here, but some of the more pertinent ones, I know that Department of Revenue and Taxation, they're operating at a limited basis. There are actually no customers that are, they're not open for customers, so they're operating on a online basis. And so the Department of Revenue and Taxation is a really good example of the expectation that government is still currently working on how to, for example, Department of Revenue and Taxation, such a large facility, how we're supposed to physically move certain services out. And so that's currently being discussed. So upon May 11th, if and when the PCOR 2 is declared, all of these government services may not open, but they're expected to open at some point. And so I know that there are already some currently open today, which includes Department of Land Management, and to a certain extent, Guam Department of Labor as it relates to their efforts to stand up the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, as well as Department of Administration at ITC building to collect payments from at the Treasury of Guam. So the government's currently working on this opening plan, and it'll be, my assumption is that it will be over a period of time. They all may not open at once, but they are slated to be open during PCOR 2. And on the bottom right here, K-12 schools and higher education institutions in PCOR 2 will remain closed. So we'll get into the how, and so these are kind of the responsibilities that have been discussed amongst the recovery panel advisors, and we'll talk about the process. And I know there's a lot of questions as it relates to, okay, how can I open? What do I have to submit? Am I going to get approvals and things like that from public health? And so we'll kind of hopefully try to clear up some of those questions. So this is the slide that we kind of went over last Thursday, but I've included in red here something in addition that the Department of Public Health and Social Services will also be releasing over the next, hopefully in the next few hours. But overall, businesses, NGOs, government, individuals, it has to happen. Face masks are going to be required and should be mandatory in all types of, in all the not only current businesses that are operating, but also all the new ones that are all the other ones that will be added to those set list of authorized activities. Social distancing is required at all times, and special accommodations should be made for vulnerable individuals. So I'll kind of go from left to right on this, but I'm going to spend a lot of time here on this slide on the left-hand side related to businesses. And so we kind of discussed this during the press conference last Thursday, and I'm going to kind of repeat it again, obviously, for those that weren't able to catch it. Adjusted business operating guidelines are to be submitted by industry representatives to the Department of Public Health and Social Services prior to business opening, based on USDOL and OSHA guidance on preparing workplaces for COVID-19, as well as industry best practices. So just to kind of discuss the method in which we determine this type of opening process. There are a lot of other states and other jurisdictions in their reopening plans that set up government panels or subgroups for each of these industries. But I know that there were two ways, or there were two methods or ends of the spectrum in terms of how to reopen certain businesses or the economy in general. And one was, well, do we require all businesses to submit a plan and have the government approve each plan, which is obviously a very labor-intensive job, and obviously the capacity to be able to do that in an efficient manner may have prevented a lot of activity from beginning quickly. On the other end of the spectrum, we could have said, okay, let's just say we'll open and hope and trust that everyone will, just follow what we hope is a responsible way of operating in this current environment. So we found a way kind of down the middle where instead of businesses having to submit specific operating guidelines as it relates to social distancing, as it relates to sanitization of the workplace and training and all that, we worked through the Chamber of Commerce as well as Women's Chamber of Commerce to work with these industries, these businesses that represent these industries, to submit one specific guideline as it relates to each industry. And currently, I believe that the Recovery Panel advisors and the representatives in it from the Chamber of Commerce, Christine and Holly from the Women's Chamber, as well as David John and Joaquin Cook, have compiled the industry guidelines that are specific to the ones that are identified to be open. And so the new thing on this slide here is that there's the Department of Public Health and Social Services are going to be providing minimum pandemic workplace operational requirements that should be met. And so in reviewing a lot of these industry specific guidelines that have been provided by Holly and Christy and Dave and Ken, these minimum pandemic workplace requirements are very broad. So it appears that it's already included in these industry guidelines. So we'll go over what those are in the next few slides. I'll just kind of point to the bottom left here. Limited occupancy rate will be established. And there's probably a lot of questions on what that is. Is it 25%? Is it 30%? Is it 50%? All I have to say is that it's yet to be determined. There are states that have done initial openings at 25% before many businesses were closed. I believe there was the government instituted a 50% limited occupancy rate. So that will be incorporated into the announcement and the declaration because it has to be. So I may not be able to answer any questions as it relates to that. As it relates to government and individuals, government will have to obviously operate under similar guidelines to ensure that the public and the employees in the government are safe and the risk of spread of COVID-19 is minimized. I won't go over everything on this slide. I just wanted to kind of make that point. What I wanted to kind of spend a little bit of time on is this minimum pandemic workplace operational requirements. And so, it's very sensitive here. Okay. So First and foremost, the number one thing, obviously, with this minimum pandemic workplace operational requirements is the mandate the wearing of face masks. And again, there's this asterisk here, final minimum pandemic workplace operational requirements to be issued by public health, hopefully at some point today. But the wearing of a face mask, I wanted to kind of, I'm not a medical doctor, but I did request this slide from the physicians advisory group. And this is just kind of, I'm not going to go over everything. I just want to make a point that that the physicians have made is that wearing a face mask limits the spread of COVID-19. And there are two factors as it relates. You'll see on the x-axis, how good is the mask, and then on the y-axis, how many people wear it. So percent of adherence to wearing it, and then percent of efficacy of wearing it. And so, depending on how good the mask is and how much people wear it, they're saying that, let's say, for example, you see here in red, if 60% of people wear masks that are 60% effective, that's enough to control the epidemic. And you'll notice here on this kind of curve, this one is what's considered R0, which is a term related to how many the spread of the virus. So if one person had transmitted the virus or had caught the virus, then wearing face masks based on this study will limit it to one person that they may infect, whereas as opposed to other places, as an example, not a representative example, but as an example, places like Italy, where their R0 is like 9 or 10 or more, I think. So limiting it to one is obviously a best practice, and I just kind of wanted to make sure I mentioned that. And this is obviously from the sources there. You can see it on the bottom, but I just wanted to make the point of the importance of wearing a face mask. And so I'm going to put mine on right now because I sound like a hypocrite. Okay, so the minimum pandemic workplace operational requirements mandate wearing a face mask. I can read everything here, but I'm just going to kind of briefly go over them. These are going to be, these will be released by public health. Like I said, again, I keep saying that it's going to hopefully it's going to happen today. Develop and communicate social distancing policies. So, there's in terms of what the industry-specific guidelines that were sent by the chamber and Women's Chamber, it appears that all these operational requirements are kind of included in what's already been submitted. In terms of developing and communicating social distancing policies, which try to help protect or should help protect employees as well as those who fear returning to work and customers, to help communicate to them that these are the social distancing policies that that each business is enacting. There's a consideration of physical workspace modifications, and these can kind of include separating desks and workstations, modifying open floor plans by adding partitions if there are no partitions already for employees, making only certain workstations available. So depending on your space requirements, maybe just making every other workstation usable, closing or modifying common conference rooms and break rooms, or modifying high-touch surfaces such as replacing latch-based doorknobs or handles with doors that can be easily pushed open or closed. These are just kind of considerations that we've kind of included in this. It's not on the slide, but I'm just reading exactly what public health maybe should be announcing soon, as well as displaying marking or signs reminding customers and employees to maintain social distancing, avoid touching surfaces unnecessarily, wash your hands properly, and use hand sanitizer and hand washing facilities, and wear a mask. So these are kind of what is suggested to be included in. Okay, not sure what happened. All right. No. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Okay, and yeah, so these are just kind of recommendations that should be in some kind of social distance, or that are considerations that could be put into your social distancing policies. Number 3 is just limiting attempt to limit in-person interactions and physical contacts, obviously to the maximum extent possible. fewer in-person meetings, instructing employees not to use other employees' workspaces, equipment, setting staggered or spaced lunch break schedules and waiting area. Waiting area seating should meet social distancing requirements of 6 feet or more. Number 4, train employees on social distancing policies. So if you do have policies, obviously training employees, especially managers or supervisors, that may need the training so that it could be enforced. Individuals are recommended to be designated as responsible contacts for overseeing this, which probably would be your managers and supervisors. And then consider how to track compliance and consistently discipline employees for failure to follow protocols. And just the last 2 here is implement regular screening protocols for employees, customers, clients, or other workplace visitors. So this is just consider training personnel on how to appropriately conduct screening at entry points. There could be a consideration to include temperature screens or other symptom checks. Consider whether they will require personal protective equipment. There's a little bit more detail on that, I believe, on the guidance that's going to be released. And then send any employees who are exhibiting flu-like symptoms home. I think that's probably a no-brainer, but obviously in some of these protocols, it should be mentioned that anyone experiencing or exhibiting any of these types of symptoms shouldn't be allowed, obviously, inside the workplace. And lastly, and just generally, assess sanitary workplace conditions and policies. Consider additional cleaning and disinfecting policies. And I'm not going to go down the line here, but just making available hand sanitizers or cleaning supplies to employees and customers, and making that available maybe even at the entrance of a workplace. Obviously, before opening, it'd be good to analyze your infrastructure, air conditioning systems, just to see if it has sanitary conditions that are conducive for work, because a lot of businesses may have been closed for a while. And then obviously disinfect and clean bathrooms, which should be on a periodic basis during the day. Okay, so I have just a few more slides, and obviously we're going to be available for questions. And I know there's probably going to be a lot of questions, but I just wanted to go over how PCOR 2 is declared, just really technically how that works. Is that, well, currently the governor had promulgated Executive Order 2020-11, which extended the public health emergency and established the PCOR readiness system, the Pandemic Condition Readiness System. But in that, she also extended all the restrictions. And so based on these medical data and public health preparedness triggers that will inform her decision, what will happen is essentially she will issue an executive order or promulgate an executive order, which will set out the details of such declaration to gradually lift these restrictions in line with the PCOR system. So in that declaration, she'll include the occupancy rate for reopening in PCOR 2, as well as the DPHSS guidance memo related to the authorization for certain business activities to be effective. So because public health we want to kind of signal what businesses are going to be open, the memo will come out earlier than May 11th, but that will be effective on May 11th. So the guidance memo will come out earlier instead of what had occurred previously, where the guidance memo came after the executive order. We're trying to do that. We're trying to preempt the executive order so that everyone's kind of prepared to open. And then just to note, flexibility in the determination of authorized business activities during PCOR 2. I just wanted to kind of reiterate that if you're a business that's not identified initially upon the declaration of PCOR 2, that does not mean during PCOR 2 that can't change. And obviously, the process on how to understand if it can change is really dependent on a lot of medical data and just really hospitalization and cases. And that's really something that I think weighs on the governor a lot as it relates to what to open, how to open, and how quickly to open a lot of these things, and so, or a lot of these business activities. So that I just wanted to kind of explain just technically how PCOR 2 is declared. And then lastly, when is PCOR 2 expected to be announced? We already know that it's been announced for me. It was announced, okay, let me make this very clear. announcement for the potential to move to PCOR 2 was done on May 6th by Governor Leon Guerrero during her press conference. And she announced it for May. She announced May 11th as the date. I think just a couple days ago, as the date on which we were open. So this was dependent on This is obviously dependent on continued monitoring of medical data and public health preparedness standards. And then the declaration, which is the effective date. This is when the executive order will be effective, which is expected to be Monday, May 11th. Again, subject to the aforementioned medical data and public health preparedness criteria. So let me see here. Just as a note for any inquiries related to opening of businesses and non-governmental organizations, you know, we've the chambers, GVB and GITA have kind of partnered in terms of trying to answer a lot of the questions, because obviously there's going to be a lot, and I hope that this helps clear a lot of things up. And I know that I think I have one more slide there. Yeah, so this is just who was on the recovery panel of advisors. But what I wanted to do now, I think, Kathy, I guess we can take questions. And I guess lastly, what I want to say is I want to again thank the chambers, the Guam Chamber of Commerce and the Women's Chamber of Commerce for this opportunity. We're open to, myself and the panel is open to questions, because we know that there's going to be a lot of them. But hopefully we can answer as many as we can in the time we have today. So thank you again, Kathy, Christine, and Holly, and David, John, and Kin. I guess we're open to questions.
We'd like to ask everybody to come back online, and you can manage the questions on the chat box. Thank you.
Kat, can you put up the frequently asked questions and, if possible, some of the guidelines? So we wanted to kind of have an overview of some of the questions that both chambers have been fielding consistently. And so hopefully that will answer some of the inquiries that we're getting. But consistent one that I'm seeing on the chat for questions is whether dine-in restaurants and food courts will be allowed to open as far as their in-dining services. And as you see on the listing of businesses that were approved for opening, dine-in services currently are not approved. We have submitted guidelines and are hoping that based on the review by the advisory panel that it should come on. As Ricky announced, the initial listing is ones that everyone's pretty comfortable can open by May 11th, and that, you know, following the industry standards, you know, they're good to go. But there were a bit more concerns with the in-dining service, which is basically what happens in the food courts when they're allowed to sit and eat in that area. And so we're hoping within the next week or so that those standards that we submit, or those guidelines, give the level of comfort to our medical advisory group so that they could add that on. I also noticed that there was a request as well for golf courses. That likewise, yeah, go ahead, David.
Restaurants really quick is, you know, I know if you're not on that initial list, it's obviously disappointing, right? There's a couple different ways the governor could have gone about opening up things. She could have gone and said, okay, everybody open on the 11th. And then if the numbers turned out not so good, then we would have to be pulling back, right? So at first, if you're not on the list, I understand how disappointed you would be. But if we went that route and then we had to pull back, then we would be retrenching, and that could cause more problems than good. So the idea was to start with some businesses before we even get to who they were, but some businesses, see how it goes, and then if it continues to go as we anticipate it going, then to open up more businesses maybe a week later, maybe a little bit after that, but kind of targeting it out maybe a week after that. And if that continues down the road, then we can start pulling back some of the regulations from within and loosening it up. But if we do it too much too quickly and it goes wrong, then the governor has the only tool in the governor's disposal would be to pull back and lock back down, and that you could all figure out how that would go. So the decision was made to open some businesses up, make sure it continues to go correctly, open up the next group of businesses, if that goes correctly, and then figure out if there's anything that could be loosened up, if at all. There might be not. Maybe everything's going okay, we don't loosen things up. But to do things in a granular format so that we don't have to pull back. And so that's key on that. The numbers have been looking good. Ken and I had a meeting yesterday with the governor, so did Ricky. She's very optimistic. We're not going to pin her down on a date because that doesn't go so well. But I think we should be setting up for that second tranche of companies to be coming on somewhere between 7 and 14 days after that first tranche. I'm confident with that that we could be looking at that kind of a timeline. But again, we can't target her down on that because we need to look at the data. And if the numbers go the wrong direction, then that's going to move to the right. But if the numbers hold the way we think they are, that we should be confident to get into a second ring of companies thereafter. And again, we realize that you're disappointed if you're not in that group. The governor would love to see everything open up, but it's hard to argue with the numbers. The decisions that have been made got us down to 0.01100, whatever it is. That's pretty strong. So we don't want to see that opening in the wrong direction and then everything moves to the right.
Yeah, can I just answer the food court question directly? Food courts and shopping centers. Food courts and shopping centers, I know that the governor mentioned, will be authorized to open, but it'll be for takeout, similar to your takeout for restaurants in general. So the idea was that the congregation of individuals in a food court is something that she doesn't feel comfortable with. So the food courts in shopping centers will be authorized to open, but only for takeout. And so I guess the same way certain non-essential retail items are cordoned off in these larger retail stores, the same should be cordoned off in terms of food courts. So I hope that answers that question.
Okay, and so we have the request as well on whether golf courses will be allowed to open, and then a request to kind of clarify for nonprofit organizations, are they under professional services? And then also like CPA offices, are they under professional services, and will they be allowed to open?
Yeah, sure. So on the slides, obviously, golf courses were on the right side of that slide. And I'll just reiterate again, and as well as David John had mentioned, that doesn't preclude any opening in PCOR 2 at some point. But initially, that activity is not considered for the initial opening of PCOR 2. And the other one was, yeah, CPA offices and legal offices, I believe, are already considered essential services under DPHSS Guidance Memo 2020-05.
Okay.
And for nonprofit organizations, under professional services, yeah. So I think in terms of essential activities, I think we may have to get back to you on that question.
I think I can kind of lend to that as well for nonprofits. Just to kind of say something here on that is, if you're a nonprofit, you operate in different things. So you might have an essential service already rolling out. So you might have a homeless shelter or something like that. So you're already operating in essential. But then you might have a thrift store or something that might be considered non-essential at this time, but it's opening up. Retail is opening up on May 11th. The targeted date. So you would just follow that industry guideline per your operation. So you'd be looking at that. So I think that's the easiest way, and that's why we put NGOs with business instead of separating, because NGOs are businesses, but they might have different types of industries. They're not one specific industry. They would just follow the specific industry guidelines for that.
So Ricky, we have another question that's asking for businesses that are allowed to open. For example, the retail stores. This is everything in the store, correct? Like there will be no sectioned off of kind of what's happening now with Payless and Kmart. So come May 11th, everything will open.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because the current DPHSS guidance memo does state specifically, and we have all seen it, it's been cordoned off, just what's considered non-essential items. So that's expected to be lifted. So any business that are not selling, as an example, greeting cards, so that's been cordoned off. So that should be allowed to open along with all other retail establishments. And obviously, again, just with the caveat that there's going to be an occupancy rate reduction that's going to be announced in the coming days. So that'll obviously limit the traffic that could go into these businesses.
There's also a question with employees returning to work, the concern that daycares are not on the listing. So, the request or the question was, when is that anticipated?
Yeah, so I mean, I can't say when it'd be anticipated, but I guess all of our hope is that we can get to a point where the governor could feel comfortable with that congregate setting with children. And I think that's kind of, I'll say this, that the Opening Up America plan actually in the first phase still has schools and youth activities closed. And so as it relates to daycares, I know we had some discussion as it relates to specifically possibly allowing them to open for essential or first responders. But then I know that it will hopefully be open at some point during PCOR 2.
Okay, and then for the panel, just kind of a dual question. The first is if I would like to submit or provide my input for the industry standards, how do I go about doing that? Because one of the questions asks like who's selected from the industry to submit, but I know for both chambers we've been very open. We're accepting information and suggestions from everyone. So the first part is how do we go about submitting that? And then the second part is when are these industry guidelines going to be sent to all the businesses so that they could have them to follow? So I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in on the advisory panel members.
Maybe I can, if I can go first with that one.
Okay.
The chambers have been instrumental in collecting these industry guidelines and working with the businesses. The submission of that, the Public Health and Social Services will be issuing out an email address from which these guidelines can be submitted. And for the most part, I believe many of those that have been listed to be authorized to open upon PCOR 2 declaration, many of those industry guidelines the chambers have already kind of compiled. And so once that email address is up, that'll be the official submission. And to your second point about, well, when do businesses, how do they know what those guidelines are? If maybe obviously you didn't work with all of the businesses that there could be in each industry. So Public Health is going to be posting those online on their website. And so that should be kind of the clearinghouse in terms of all those industry guidelines that for those businesses or those industries that are authorized to open upon PCOR 2 declaration.
Right, and I think for chamber members, reach out to Eileen at the Guam Women's Chamber and Catherine at the Guam Chamber of Commerce. We plan to also post that on our websites as well as disseminate it out to our members. But you don't need to be a member to be able to reach out to either of the organizations. We'll be happy to provide that to you. So one of the questions that was asked is when is Revenue Tax going to be open for business license renewals? Because I guess some of those business licenses have been or are expired during the quarantine. And so, Ricky, can you provide us information on that?
Yeah. So there's no expected date when which parts of DRT will be open because I think they're currently looking at moving certain services outside of that building because there's just absolutely no way they could operate even on a staggered schedule because I think their motor vehicle division alone will probably take up the entire occupancy rate that may be authorized. So I apologize, I don't have a specific date, but I know that as we move toward getting into PCOR 2, Department of Revenue and Taxation will be most likely issuing guidance. I know they've been doing a lot of extensions as it relates to a lot of the licenses and as well as Public Health has extended some certifications. So those those will be announced by Daphne at RevTax, hopefully in the coming days. But we're still working on the government side as it relates to which businesses and what services. Oh, sorry, which government offices and which services will be open. It may be in a kind of a staggered basis where some will open, some parts of RevTax will open, and others will open later on. So.
Okay.
Great. Jump in real quick, just going back, and that's really great on Rev and Tax, obviously. Just to jump back in on the industry guidelines, because I know you guys, a lot of you have questions about that too, is as Christine said, we reached out to a lot of our members, put it open, and also looked at national standards and national guidelines, and then compiled those together. Those are just for your references as well, as far as something you can utilize if you need assistance in developing those industry guidelines. So that's something that we have put together and then put forward to public health. And I know Ricky will talk kind of about the outcome of that a little bit more, but just they are developed, and we did utilize a lot of what you guys had sent in, which was awesome. So thank you so much. And then just pulling down national guidelines of how that's rolling out right now, what the standards are becoming, and what the guidelines currently are.
So Ricky, added to the professional services, there was a request on Photoshops and I forgot what the other one was, but I just think overall services, I think there's a question on that because it's not real clear whether that will be part of the opening. And then, you know, we have a question on footwear and clothing shops, and I think that falls under the general guidelines for retail that will be released. So you know, if once these are released, if you follow through and you kind of consider all the suggestions that are put in there, the recommendations for your business, then you should be good to go.
Yeah. Can I just add, you mentioned about photo. I see photo studios open under PCOR 2 question. I think it's a good question, and thanks. My assumption is that it'll be considered under professional services, but I'll just make sure I talk to public health on if they're going to identify that specifically.
Right. And then just kind of to reiterate, because I know that there's a lot of messages or questions coming through on dine-in and food court. You know, as we indicated, it's not currently on the list, but that we are pushing for it to be added on. And as soon as we get the go-ahead, we'll be sure to let everyone know as well. So, you know, as David John mentioned, we know there's disappointment. We know that you guys are raring to go. You know, we're working through the list. It includes like the golf courses, the you know, all the other industries that were under preview or under review listing. All of those we're working to get added on to the approved business openings. And you know, we hope that as the numbers continue to show that we're trending well, that decision gets made. That's actually all the questions that came in that I see. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in and just kind of have some last parting comments.
I'll just add back to the DRT and the licensing. Obviously, there's other licenses that are going to need to be obtained. For example, when we do go back to restaurants and people obtaining health certificates and things like that, we have had the discussion. We're still waiting on the answer, but it sounded like what they're looking at doing is doing an extension on the expiration or maturity of those licenses. Again, understanding that all the departments have been closed throughout the period, but also to prevent a massive rush to these different agencies all at once, where people are going to just be gathering and congregating to get their licenses renewed. So kind of just to add on to Ricky's comments about Rev and Tax, obviously the business license piece, but there are a bunch of other licenses that I'm sure everyone is waiting to get renewed to just be in compliance with the law. So I just wanted to add that in.
Yes, and then just for those, the latest questions coming in that are asking for the guidelines for the industries that are targeted to open on May 11th, yes, all of those specific guidelines are part of that the information that will be hopefully posted to Public Health's website this afternoon and sent out by the chambers. So yes, they are included. And then, of course, as we talked about with gyms and fitness centers, that again is part of the under review group that we are submitting the guidelines in for, and we hope to have that approved in a week or so if everything goes well. I have a question here. Do employees need to be tested for the virus prior to opening?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is no. Yeah.
So long as they follow the guidelines of, if they're sick, they're displaying symptoms, please don't have them report to work, and that the business is implementing the face masks, hand washing, and all the sanitary protocols, then you should be okay. And
urge all the businesses to follow these protocols and not to skimp out on them, because the worst thing that can happen out of this whole thing is we open up and the numbers start going the wrong way, and then we go back into button down. I mean, we have to all be in this together. If we see other businesses out there that aren't following things, try to help counsel them before maybe you throw them under the bus if they're not responding. We as a community have to police this, because if we don't get it right, then this thing goes to the right, and we take a bad situation and turn it into a worse situation. So let's all do this together. Let's all, make sure that we're doing the right things and keep these numbers low, so that we can get our other businesses that didn't make the list first time out, so that we can get them to join us and we can start getting the activity going locally. And then we can start focusing on what we're doing as far as bringing the tourists in over the summer. And that discussion has started between the doctors and the tourism industry. So we'd like to get core 2 going so we can start working on core 3 discussions. So we need to all do our part. So let's stress that to each other when we're having conversations. That's all I'd have to say.
Yeah, thank you, David John, because that was one of the questions that just came up as, with respect to the quarantine. And I don't know, Ricky, if one of the questions that we've been fielding over at the chamber as well is for returning, like kids coming back from school. Are they going to be home quarantined or quarantined at all, or has any decisions been made on that, or is it still on a case-by-case basis?
Yeah, I think my understanding is the decision that was made is that under PCOR 2, the current or the existing quarantine requirements are going to continue to be in place. But obviously that doesn't preclude the opportunity for that to change. But I think that's specifically as it relates to your question on residents. So I think that's currently under discussion. But to my understanding, upon PCOR 2 declaration, if that's what we're specifically talking about, I think the quarantine requirements are not expected to change.
On that one, Ricky, I've heard a lot of complaints about that, about we're bringing family back and having to put them in, people having to go into hotels as opposed to going home. But some of the things I've heard with talking to the doctors and things going on that maybe shed some light on it is first of all they haven't when they've done the contact testing on the people who have this have tested positive, none have come from the tourists. It's come from you and I traveling off island and bringing it back. And so this is the group that we have to monitor, and the actions that have been taken by the administration obviously have been successful. Otherwise we wouldn't be at 0110 or whatever it is. So I know that if you have a family member who had to go spend time in a hotel for 2 weeks, that wasn't a fun experience for you. But you can't argue with the results on that. So just wanted to point that one out.
Okay, and then we had a question on whether plexiglass shields are required. And I mean, the questions coming in now are more asking about the specific guidelines. And so, when we send this out, I think a lot of those questions will be answered, and we hope to get that to you by this afternoon. And so please, if you're not already on the chamber's mailing or email list or membership blast receipt thing, then contact either the Guam Women's Chamber or the Guam Chamber of Commerce so that we can send that to you. And then also look out for it on the public health website, which we hope will be up by this afternoon. I see Kat coming on. That's usually a signal that we're kind of coming to the end of the hour. Kat?
Yeah, Christine, can I just?
Sorry, this is Holly. Can I just add something real quick? We also developed an FAQ that we've published as well, and we can send out. The chamber has as well. So to answer more of these questions, because a lot of them are the same questions that, like Christine said, we keep getting in, and we just want to make sure that you have that. So we do have the FAQ developed, and that'll be sent out and available, as well as all the industry guidelines. And these are guidelines. So once again, like David John was saying, really helping police one another, right, to help the public to support one another and seeing what's going on. But these are self-regulations that are really required to help the public health of our community. So they're not set in stone, but these are the requirements that we've curated on a local and national basis to just help provide as a resource for you. Thank you.
Can I just lastly add that and echo kind of what the governor mentioned previously, and that is, I don't think we would be able to get to this point about talking about any kind of reopening if it wasn't for everyone's diligence and responsiveness to the emergency and being just responsible to each other. And in terms of how this reopening plan is kind of going to occur, there's going to be a lot of trust involved. And I know that I wanted to leave everyone with this quote, and I forgot to, but I'll just say it. And it's a quote from Abraham Lincoln where he said, "The people, when rightly and fully trusted, will return the trust." And I think that's kind of very key in terms of how this reopening process will work, because we all trusted each other to get to this point. And I think that trust needs to kind of be a lot stronger as we kind of gradually move into this reopening process. So, but thank you again for the opportunity, and with this distinguished panel, I'm humbled and honored to be a part of it, and appreciate all the guidance as well.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate all of you for your participation. So thank you, David and Ken, Christine, Holly, and of course, Ricky. We are going to have these, we are actually recording this webinar, and we will have it available for folks if they wish to review it again. And I want to apologize to everybody. We have some technical difficulties on the handout section, so we will definitely make sure that you receive them. And we will sign off now. Thank you very much for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you at another virtual hall or webinar. Thanks. Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Kathy. Bye.